Thank you so much for joining us today on the Living Room Disciple podcast. And honestly, I can't wait because today I get to introduce you all to Michael Rosado, who's one of my best friends. And he's also a musical artist who performs under the name Windwords. And for me, this conversation was just incredibly rad and such a blessing because I get to introduce you all to not only an amazing musician, not only someone who is working hard to create a healthy local music scene in my community, but also just an amazing human and a good friend. So thank you so much for joining the Living Room Disciple podcast, where discipleship finds a home. So you have been on my I really want to interview him list since the beginning of this podcast, and I don't think I ever even told you that.
Yeah, I was there when you were spitballing the idea for the podcast. So,
which is crazy.
So yeah, even being here is wild. How long ago was that when we were just like talking about that?
Oh, 9 months at least.
Okay, 9 months.
Which is kind of crazy too, that like in just 9 months things have gone from like conceptualized to
realized.
Yeah. I think this is like I think this is gonna be like our 30th episode when it goes live. Yeah, isn't that nuts?
That is wild.
Dang. For everyone who doesn't know, Michael, you've been one of my best friends for a few years now, and one of the biggest blessings to me in my life. But not everyone can be your friend. You know, everyone wants to be, but no, not everyone can be. But one of the things that you do that serves the wider community, what everyone can do, is and I knew you as Michael before I started listening to your music, but you're a musician under the name Windwords, and we're gonna dive into that in just a moment. But if nobody's ever listened to your music before, I mean, how would you describe your art?
What genre?
What genre? I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know. I find it hard to even figure out how to word that because genres, they seem to blend in and out of each other these days. But I call it talk rock music.
Talk rock?
Yeah.
That's actually a really...
That's what I called it for a while. Because it started as a spoken word project.
Yeah. Which
was straight out of my journal. And I was really just curious in how I am to communicate this, or how is this going to be sung? Is this going to be spoken? It's all of that. So it morphed more so into a musical kind of aspect of the poems. So talk rock is just my easy answer, I guess.
I love that. So. Yours for the Taking is a song that I think kind of like epitomizes that in a good way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's got that rock element, got that beautiful singing, and then just kind of pauses for some beautiful spoken word, which is super cool.
Yeah, that song, I love that we were able to incorporate a lot of even how Windward started into that song. So it kind of feels, even though it's a newer song, it feels kind of fresh and like a nod to what was. So yeah, it can be either talk rock, or I've grown up in like the post-hardcore kind of scene. It could be indie rock. It could be spoken word music. I don't know.
I do feel like genres matter less and less nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean,
so I don't know.
Especially for what you do, which I would just for those. I mean, you know this about me, but and for those out there who know me pretty well, I'm pretty critical with my art. You know what I mean? Like I really care about what I listen to, and what I've noticed is people who really emphasize the art that they're doing tend to not easily fit into, I think, normal kind of like categorical boxes, right? Because I think when you're making that art, you're not considering trends or mainstream, or considering the box, the lane you're trying to stay in. You're really just considering the purpose of the art, which is a great segue.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've really, which I feel like a terrible friend, I don't feel like I've ever really asked you this, but the good news is at least I'll be curious the whole podcast.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit, like you said that Windwords kind of came out of a spoken word project.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the origin story of Windwords, because I mean, you've been doing music for a long time.
Yes. Yeah. I was doing music since I was about 14, 15. Started playing drums in our local youth group, and just in the worship band, and then in several bands.
The training ground of all Christian musicians, the worship
Pretty
band.
much,
Yeah.
pretty much.
It's not a bad thing. It's not bad.
I was in a lot of like hardcore bands growing up locally, and from that scene, I was playing drums. I was doing singing, like a little background with the band, and then I was doing a lot of spoken word while I was playing drums in my last band, and then I was just writing so much in my journal in high school, and I didn't really know. I didn't know where to go with a lot of that. I didn't know, like, am I supposed to be sharing this? Is this just for me? And for many years, it was really a precious and sacred thing to me.
Yeah.
Because it's how I really processed a lot of things that I was going through. It's how I learned to even pray and ask a lot of questions and to literally just see what's in my heart on paper, and to really ask the Lord, like, what does this look like for me to follow you in this circumstance, or with these doubts, or when things are great, when life's awesome. So it was really one of those things that I really clung to, and it became something really precious to me already, without even having a platform for it, which was, I'm really, really grateful for that. So when Windward started, though, it was like, I felt like the Lord was telling me, hey, these aren't just for you. So I'm like, well, I was like learning guitar at the time.
So you're like writing your prayer journal, and you feel like the Lord's saying, like, share this intimacy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I didn't know what it would look like. I just knew it was obedience to be like, okay. And I opened my journal. I played a few chords that I was learning, because I was just learning guitar maybe a year, or about like, actually a couple years before I started Windwards, I was learning guitar. So I was playing the chords I knew and sharing the poems and songs that I was starting to write and learn my voice with. And so it kind of just became something. And I love that it's constantly been changing. I even started bringing a drum with me, because that's the language I knew. So I'd have somebody, hey, can you play this beat behind this poem and stuff? So somebody would be playing next to me, and I'd be still sharing the spoken word stuff. So yeah.
Have you always seen spoken word poetry, really Windwards? Have you always seen that as like a community project? Because even now you just mentioned, like, you just bring a drum and just grab someone to play. Has this always been something that you've done kind of like in community, with community?
I think when I first started it specifically, I was like, I don't know if this is a band. And that's honestly how I endeavored to do it. I was like, whoever's there is Windwards. Like, we are, this is Windwards when we're hanging out, and whatever it becomes for the live show. I thought that was always really special to me. So it wouldn't be about a person, or it wouldn't be about specific people. And now it's definitely evolved into, like, whoever can come hang and play, like, it's the best. Like, it's been really rad getting to do more so, like, the band aspect of it. But yeah, it didn't start that way. So
I think I've seen you perform about half a dozen times, and every single time you've had a different, like...
Yeah, somebody new.
Someone new, yeah. Or no one.
Or just me. Yeah.
And that's always been... I was talking to Katie, actually, about it at one of your concerts.
Yeah.
It's Katie's wife. Well, not that you don't know. Anyway, moving on.
She's your wife.
In case you were unaware. I remember, like, looking at her and being like, dude, it was...
Which one?
Like a cello.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
when
I was
Lauren
like...
was on cello? Yeah.
Yes, I was like, this is a cello that he's... like, this is... I've heard this song so many times, never with a cello.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful. And it was kind of this moment of, like, realizing how beautifully dynamic your music is, in large part because, not that the instruments aren't incredibly important, but in large part because the words almost transcend those instruments. Does that make sense? Like, I just feel like the instruments become a beautiful vehicle for the words, but the words are like a cargo that's worth carrying. Wow, I'm feeling very poetic, evidently. Yeah.
It sounds really beautiful.
Yeah, man, I need to do spoken word. I'm just kidding. But seriously, like the cargo, the words are so beautiful and so meaningful and so deep that it's kind of like you can, I don't want to say you can put any boat around it, but it fits so many different musical. You should cut me off at this point because
I'm following you. I feel like that's what makes it really special to me specifically. Each time it's like sometimes we're hearing it for the first time in this version, live, and with everyone in the room, and I think that I love that about it. Like that, it doesn't have to be the same thing, but whoever shows up, they make it something even more beautiful. So, yeah.
Okay, I've got to ask, and I do remember asking this at one point, but where did the name Windwards originate? What's the power behind that name?
Yeah. I was, what year was it? Might have been the end of 2013 or 2014 when I heard someone at a conference sharing, it was Revelation 3 specifically from the scriptures, and it was sharing about the words were, "Listen to the windwards, the Spirit blowing through the churches," and I was really captivated by that title for the Holy Spirit. I thought that had so much weight behind it, had so much beauty, especially when we recognize that the Spirit was the breath of God hovering over the waters, and just breath is like the life of God and the Spirit of God. So, listen to the windwards, the Spirit blowing through all the churches, and I almost just took that and ran with it of like, I hope that this could be an edifying work for the church. I hope that it can provide hope for those who are hopeless. However they gather from any of the times that we are at a show or like they're listening, wherever they're listening, maybe some of these stories and maybe even my reflection of this faith journey would encourage somebody and just breathe some hope or life there. So that's always been kind of the heart behind the endeavor and the prayer behind it.
Yeah.
Not that I'm like just writing straight up worship songs just to kind of, check that box or anything. But honestly, these are all just reflections that I'm like learning. What are they becoming as they are becoming? So, Windwards came from, I believe it's Revelation 3, and there's a few other places. It's from the Message version actually that I found out when I heard it was read aloud. I'm like, where is this? Yeah. And so I looked it up. It's actually the Message version, and I just thought that was a unique name for Holy Spirit. So,
and I think one of the things I think about a lot is what type of art edifies the church. And when it comes to music, I do think obviously worship music is a part of that. I know, at least in my life, having praise songs, sing in a group, what I mean? But I think one of the areas that has probably edified me most, especially like praise and worship is like a creed, in my opinion, like a good praise and worship song, something you bolt out, like you kind of belt out. It's beautiful, and it's like an I declare, and sometimes you say it because inwardly you feel that, and sometimes you're like, I'm saying it because I need to feel that, and I think that's where praise and worship can be really beautiful. Well, oftentimes praise and worship doesn't do, and I'm talking about, Hillsong, praise and worship, that type of corporate, easy to sing along to. What that often can't do, and I don't think the medium is intended to do, is to use a song to look at someone and to say, I'm experiencing this too. I feel this too. I'm grieving this too, and still point them back to Jesus. You know what I mean? I think and I think a lot of us intuitively know that we need a different type of art that we can listen to sometimes in private. And feel like we're in community. Like to be alone and realize we're not alone. And I think that's what for me, that's one of the beautiful elements of your work. And so you've mentioned a few times that oftentimes you write from a prayer journal, but I know a bunch of people who are going to be listening are probably going to think to themselves, I mean, how do I write something like that? You know, like, how do I make art like that? And so I know I'm putting you really on the spot here, you know, and so I know there's no simple formula. There's no like 1, 2, 3, do this thing, whatever. But what are some of the things that the Lord's taught you along the way of making art that has really resonated with you and you feel like is a general rule of thumb when making art to edify the church?
I think that it's important to write honestly, and this is how I've always wanted to approach it. Not so that, what do they want to hear? You know, like I think it's important to have an intention behind, what do you want your listener to take in? Sure. Yeah. I think that's important. And actually that's a great way to start and like to maybe workshop some of those things. But I can only speak from what I do, and a lot of it's unapologetically just me talking to the Lord. So and not everyone does that. Yeah. In what they're sharing in like in their music or their poetry, but that's been my first language, I guess. For my music. I didn't know how to write anything except for praise songs when I first started. Yeah. And when I say praise songs, like they were more so like psalms, I would say, like David's reflection of his own heart. And I found them to be a lot of reflections of my own heart and just like, what does it say about the Lord and like, where am I at? But with my journey of poetry, it's become me learning myself. I would say, continue to learn yourself and read from yourself honestly, and don't be afraid to sing out, like even if it sounds funny, like and make. I don't know. It's music in general. It's about making those. I don't even want to call them mistakes, but just learning your voice as you go. And I would say that can be really difficult for someone who doesn't want to sound foolish. You know, when you're starting something brand new, you're a novice at it. And a lot of fear that's held me back in the past from things is like, well, I don't want to sound dumb, or I don't want to make something dumb, or maybe they don't like it. Don't worry about that stuff. You find out, what is this becoming? What is coming out of me, and what is it becoming? And I just think that journey, or that process within the journey, has been so beautiful, and I'm so grateful for that for myself. So that's what I would encourage others, like, do that. Like, don't be afraid of like what it sounds like, how it reads. You're learning your heart, and that's already, you can't lose in that. I think there's only benefit from that.
This makes me think, while you're speaking, I'm thinking about just spiritual gifts in general.
Sure.
And I almost feel like that advice applies for any gifting of the Spirit, that like I think for much of my walk, I thought that giftings were like, I don't know, like when superheroes were just like, there's been a superpower in them, you know what I mean? There was, I don't know, some accident or some, whatever it is. And then suddenly they can run fast or shoot, lasers out of their eyes, whatever it is.
Yes.
And I thought that's how like spiritual gifts were. You know what I mean? It was just like boom, and I do think there are moments, where the Spirit just does a special work. But I think oftentimes there's a gifting that's made prevalent, and wise and discerning people who are usually much older than us can identify those things in us. Like, oh, I see the hint of teaching, or the hint of discernment, or the hint of service, or the hint of giving, or whatever it is. Like, they kind of see those seeds. Yeah. And then there's a time of choosing to nurture that in honesty, in purity before the Lord, and taking what you nurture before Jesus and then offering it to the church. There seems a parallel between that and even really how you're describing like writing music. Sure. Taking this anointing the Lord's giving you, honing that skill, but the whole time you're doing it, you're not really thinking about what people think of that skill. Sure. You're thinking about offering this to the Lord, and then by extension you offer it to the church. And I don't know, I mean, I think so much about the arts that I kind of forget sometimes that, like, that's probably true for, like, every spiritual gift, whether that's giving or hospitality or administration.
Yeah.
There's always, like, this feeling of imposter syndrome at some point, or I don't want to step up and serve the church because what if they think X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
Will I seem pretentious? Will I seem, like, whatever it is? I don't know.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I don't know. There's some beauty there.
Yeah, I think something, along the lines of, like, finding the beauty in that is recognizing I'm no expert at this, and don't let that be a personal disqualifier, because I think it could easily be like, well, what do I have to say, like, that anyone would need to hear, or we can easily disqualify ourselves, but yet that's what, like, us endeavoring to do that or to even share some of those things, it makes us human. It makes the telling of stories has been something that humans and community have done forever, and we get to participate in that, even if your story or telling of your story might seem choppy to you or whatever, and maybe you're like, well, I don't really have it all together yet, or I don't even know how to articulate this. Like, you're still, if you open your mouth, you're still inviting others into that process with you, into that humanity. And I've found that to be really a beautiful thing for me personally, when I wasn't trying to create something that people would be like, oh, then I'll know I'm not alone. I was finding that as I was sharing, I'm like, oh, wow, like, I'm connecting with individuals, and I'm realizing as I'm processing through these things, like, that I'm not alone. And my genuine need for community, and not just to produce art, but genuine need to connect with people.
We hang our heads low in the stillness of the air, like half-mast flags on flags.
So, since the time that we've known each other, I think you've been on, like, 3 or 4 tours.
Yeah.
And you've done tons and tons of shows, which is so cool to me. But I've paid attention to the things you talk about. I don't know if you ever noticed, but I probably didn't tell you. But when you come back from a tour, you just don't ever talk about, I think, the things that I would expect a lot of people to talk about. You don't talk about crowd sizes. You don't talk about how much money you made or didn't really make. You don't talk about how people received your music even. You always talk about the community. And sometimes you'll even talk about each specific stop on the tour. And the community they had or didn't have. And there's a focus when you seem to go into a place that says, I'm here to serve these people with my gift. And I also want to see and be a part of a healthy community of people who are doing the same. And then locally, I've just seen, I can still remember the first show I went to, you were like, hey, come out, And I rolled in, and to see all these people who were so comfortable, and to see an audience that was fairly large, but still felt like a family, or had familiar elements to it. May not feel like a family, but was getting way closer than a bunch of strangers should have felt, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Sure. And so you've been working hard to cultivate, with other people, to cultivate a community of, in this case, art and music in where we live, in Brevard. So tell me a little bit about your passion for community, why you spend so much time. It feels like you spend more time probably trying to cultivate community than you do actually making self-promoting art, which I think is a positive. So tell me a little bit about how you got into that, why you care about that, and we'll start there.
Yeah. I and a few other friends have had the privilege of hosting bands when they come in town, when they come to Florida, and finding a place for them to stay, finding a place for them to play their music, or share their poetry. And it's been a few years now, and we go under the name Basket Case Booking, and that's just where I communicate, on Instagram mainly.
We'll drop all the handles in the show notes.
Awesome. Yeah. So, like, that's been something that has been a gift, really, to be able to be a part of, and providing a space, because people have been kind enough to provide us this space. So yeah, we hope everyone can feel welcome. Not only the people who are showing up for the shows, obviously they're that priority as well. But we recognize that right now, being that I'm from the touring scene as well, like just that circuit, I suppose. We know what it's like in certain places that you don't feel welcome. You know, we know what it's like when you don't feel thought of or considered. You're just kind of there. And one thing I love to hear from all of the bands that have come through, they're all like, man, you guys are actually here for the music. Like, you're actually here, you're actually listening. And they're really stoked to see people, like, they're actually engaged with what's happening. It's not just like they showed up and they're interrupting their night, you know, like people's night. But it's a space where they feel, the bands themselves feel welcome. And that's my favorite thing to hear, because, you know, it's not like that everywhere. And we hope to provide that space. And we're trying to do it more consistently, at least like once a month. If not at a local church that opened their doors to us, it might be a house show. Like, we find friends that'll host house shows, and those are the best.
They really are, by the way, which I know sounds very on brand for me. Like, I fully acknowledge that, and that we're like, they're doing this literally in my living room right now. But so maybe I'm biased, but I really like music and house shows. Maybe it's just novel after 2020. I don't really know, but it's like it's a lot of fun. We love however we can get people together, and people to know they're welcome and that they matter. You know, like, their presence at those shows makes the show what it is. It makes that evening what it is. It's the intermingling of stories, like literally all together in one place and experiencing this gift called music or this gift called storytelling. And it's been very special that we got to enjoy that as a community locally, specifically. I've loved every part of it, seeing that rebuild, especially after the pandemic. We were doing it before as well, but it's become something entirely new, and new faces there, just new attitude of people, like, kind of just, we all recognize our role in building the scene back up, the culture back up. So okay, so I only have been to house shows and come to, like, local shows because I know you connected me. You were like, you should come out. So let's say someone's living in a totally different state listening to this. I mean, how does someone, like, find a local music scene, or especially local artists who are doing good work? Again, maybe I'm biased, but I'm really big on the fact that we should be putting our money and our time towards advocating for people in our local community who are doing good work. So, I mean, how does someone in Birmingham find a local music scene, or someone in Charlotte, or no other city in the United States is coming to my mind currently? So.
No, I think that's a question that so many of us who are touring right now are asking ourselves. Because, like, specifically after the pandemic, everything changed. Most of the venues closed down because they couldn't host shows. You couldn't do stuff anymore. So a lot of those music communities are still hurting. That is kind of why I emphasize, like, why I've been really stoked and encouraged at seeing what's happening here. But they still exist in those cities. If not at, like, a local bar venue. And if you go to shows and you support DIY artists, I would say those are the ones to support. Find those people in those spaces that maybe, even if you're unfamiliar with some of those spaces, or maybe it's not really your scene, I'd say try it out. Maybe you're supposed to meet someone there and figure out, hey, are there more shows? And you might find out there's more house shows. And it's become more of a tight-knit thing in a lot of communities that I've found, that I've been really grateful to be invited into. Just by other touring friends who are like, hey, like, just hit them up if you're going to the city. Hey, hit this family up, or, like, they hosted us and they're super sweet. And that's been how we've been able to navigate everywhere. It's just the kindness of people. Like,
it's so funny in like 2023 in the world of social media, word of mouth is still the most effective.
Is.
You know?
Yeah,
It's beautiful and not what I expected.
yeah. I'm not sure if I answered the question about where people in the cities can find it necessarily, but like, of course, there is still like social media where if you even look up, even a hashtag, look up this city live music, or you look up, you know, you can find live music that way. You could find different groups on Facebook, I'm sure. But just showing up at these local watering holes where there are people who are doing it, and some of them are just flying under the radar, and they're just like you said, word of mouth, and those might be the kindest people that you meet too, the ones who are just wanting to get people together and to give a platform to people and sharing their stories, and people I don't know, uniting the tribes, like in their city, and giving voice to these storytellers. So I've seen really special things in many cities that I've got to, you know, get to travel and share. It's a unique kind of, like, human experience where you're just like, oh, there is still human kindness happening. And I also want to say this too: if you can't find it in your city, or maybe you just know a handful of musicians, maybe you're supposed to just say, hey, I've got a backyard, or hey, I've got a living room. Like,
invite bands to you.
Legitimately, that's been such a huge
Cool.
thing. Like, that, what some people might be like, oh, that's nothing, I could do that. Like, it's such a huge thing. And something that I've tried to put words to when I've been invited on tours, or I've been invited to play festivals or something, like things like that, where I'm like, wow, this person or these people decided to share their most precious people with me. Like that's so huge. Like, somebody opened their living room to people that they care about to hear my stories, or like hear these songs, and I think that's amazing. Like, you know, very humbling to think like they would either want me to share with them, or them to share with me. And it may seem like a small thing to some people, but that's actually my favorite thing. Like, that I feel like super blessed these past couple years getting to do this, and this whole thing is run on that, basically. So
The teacher in me, like, always, like, takes notes in my head and then, like, comes up with, like, main ideas and points. Is that silly? I don't know if that's silly. But what I'm hearing, though, honestly, though, like, the way I would word it is our job as the church is multifaceted. There's a lot of elements to it. But in this area, it feels like the church should be part of hospitality, financial support, word of mouth, verbal support for artists in their community, and specifically artists in their community who are doing their best to glorify God and edify the church as they navigate through the authentic struggles and intimacies of being a disciple of Jesus. You know, and that means things like sacrifice, like opening up your door, or becoming a financial supporter, buying albums off Bandcamp, not just listening to them. Tell me, is that right? Is this a good idea, buying albums off Bandcamp?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, that's super kind.
And investing in these smaller by quantity, but not by potential impact.
Yeah, it's funny too, and when we're on the road, or, you know, something like a plan falls through, we're in a certain city, and so could, you know, they no longer have the space available. People just being so kind, just being like, hey, I don't have much, I literally have my living room, and we're like, that's amazing, you know. Or like, if we like, and we don't ever put it on people, like, just to say like, oh yeah, you need to give us a place to stay, or like a hotel or something. Like, it's such a huge thing if someone was like, I have this space of floor, and we're like, this is amazing. Like, literally, like, all our friends, we're so used to that, and some people are like, I'm not giving you the floor. I'm like, please, that's better than like sleeping in like outside or something.
Oh,
But,
man.
so because sometimes it could be like that, but like some people don't know even how huge it is, the space of floor, which might sound silly. But,
Well, but it's also like just and hearing other stories that you told me, like the amount of heart and soul and sacrifice that you and others go through in order to tour or to get your music out there, the amount of just, it's not easy.
yeah,
And it rarely comes back in, financial compensation, right? Like, I just feel like the average person looks at the major names out there with, millions and millions of downloads for every song.
Sure.
And they think to themselves, like, that's what music can be like. But oftentimes, the people that the Lord has called to do good work are not the people that He's like. They're not always going to be the people that like mainstream, whatever trends are going to like pick up. You know what I mean? Like the Holy Spirit just doesn't seem to follow, the billboards. It's kind of like what I've noticed. You know what I mean? He just tends to do a work with the foolish of the world, and it's like somehow made all the better for it. But we have a failure, I think, in a lot of ways, and I've been a part of that in my ignorance, of not supporting those brothers and sisters who are following and being obedient to Jesus. It's funny. I think about Jesus sends out the 72 disciples.
72.
In pairs, right, to these cities, and in obedience they go to these towns.
Yeah.
But just because they're obedient to Jesus doesn't mean those towns will receive them.
Sure.
And the towns that don't receive them, there's a punishment. Jesus says it'll be better for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than these cities, right? And what I wonder is if my ignorance, I have in some way been like that, not hospitable to the very workers, my brothers and sisters in Christ, because I haven't been supportive. I haven't been hospitable, whether that's opening up my space, whether that's MySpace. Nice. Blast from the past. Not that MySpace. Whether it's opening up my home or opening up my pocketbook or just choosing to put you all on my playlist. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is, like it just seems like there's more the church could do to support those in the local community who are aiming to do good work. And I wonder how often we have been, not exactly, but analogous, kind of like, metaphorically like, those cities that didn't receive the disciples.
That's quite a thought.
It is quite a thought. I don't know, maybe I'm going too far. I might be going too far.
No,
But it resonates with me.
But yeah, I don't know what the role of the church would be in that. But your observation of like maybe it's just been overlooked for a long time.
Yeah.
And just us as a culture, we've easily gravitated toward what is trending, and that maybe that is reflective of our heart collectively as a people in our culture. And we are the ones who make our culture, so it's like a reflection of us. And I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I just think a lot, and this is where, I need to temper my thoughts, but also there's an element of like, we live in a society right now where when we pull out our phone, we're making small financial decisions that we don't even realize. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Sometimes. So what YouTube videos we watch goes to supporting someone. What podcasts we listen to goes to supporting someone. What music we listen to goes to supporting someone. And all of that stuff, we've talked a lot about the podcast before, also forms us. It's shaping us into someone. So it's both casting a vote for what we support and it's shaping our spirits. And one of the things that I'm processing through, and I'm kind of convinced of, but I could be wrong, is that we oftentimes, in our folly and in our, I don't think it's ill-intentioned. Yeah. It's just hard to realize just how much we can impact things. We, don't utilize apps. We don't utilize. We don't go to musicians. We don't go to authors. We don't choose who to support based upon who's edifying the church and who's doing work in ministry that we support. we make the decisions exclusively off what makes me feel good,
Sure.
you know? And I think for a lot of us, it's like, yeah, that's the point of YouTube. Or, yeah, that's the point of Spotify or whatever it is. To which I'm like, maybe that's the point from its creator's intent. But what does it look like for the church to interact with, to be in the world but not of it? And I wonder if, and this is Phil speaking to Phil mostly, which is like, man, do I need to take a step back and kind of catalog a little bit about how I consume media, and not just say what's good for my spirit? That's a really important question. So yes, still that.
Yeah.
But also, how do I leverage my usage of these things in a way that also supports people I love, like you, and people who are doing good work, and people who are trying to move the kingdom forward? And is that an interesting way in 2023 to show Christian hospitality, which is weird? So we'll say half-formed thought. I don't know if I fully agree with myself at this point, but that's what I'm thinking through, you know?
Sure. Yeah, it's got me thinking too. Definitely about friends that I've met, you know, within the music community. Specifically, it's like there's so many like subcategories to this, or like subgroups, I guess, of like, specifically I feel a part of the DIY community of
You're in a lot of things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But yeah, it's like DIY, like independent artists for the most part, you know, that are all a part of this and building, and it's still even kind of like fringe Christian bands, but also, you know, deconstructing people who are a part of that, who were a part of that scene, people who are reconstructing, people who are still trying to tour, people who are not trying to tour, and like these are the people that I get to, you know, brush shoulders with. And I remember a friend of mine who was asking just one of the best questions, and it was so pointed, and his name's Christian.
Yeah.
He's awesome. My friend Christian Holiday. I met him. He was touring with a band. He was playing drums for a band called Gaffer Project at the time, and it was my first tour with them. And he asked me, he's like, what does it look like for someone today who's in the touring circuit, like, to be a disciple of Jesus, like, because he himself is one, and he's just curious how other people are doing it. Like, how do you stay rooted? Like, what is that? How do you stay not just like faithful, like, because there's like so many temptations or whatever, but it's like he was just like practically like, let's talk about this. So what does this look like in our context? You know, because there are so many different. There was a culture set in the early, like, or 2010s even, in the music scene, the Christian music scene, specifically the Christian rock music scene and Christian hardcore music scene, that had its own momentum, it had its own industry, and it had its own just pitfalls and unfortunate circumstances that happened to the people who were in that cycle and in the touring circuit at that time. So there was a lot of toxic things that we can look at that time and say, like, man, we really need to learn not to do certain things the way that was done back then, so we don't carry that into today. So when he asked me that question, I'm like, man, the only way I could know to answer is that, man, like, I think we just need each other. Like, we need to learn to ask these questions and bring our doubts and to have a space, because, and I wasn't full-time touring as much as some of these other guys were, but you can't be plugged into a local church. You don't necessarily have people that you're consistently seeing. You're seeing people around the country, and that's beautiful, and there's discipleship that happens that way. But because your life looks radically different than maybe your home church back, like the people who are at your home church, there's a lot of like conflicting feelings, because you're like, well, I don't have that life that they have. So what does it look like for me? And then you could kind of just get caught up in the motion, just like everyone does in life. but the recognition of like, oh man, these conversations are super important, and touring with people who bring those conversations to the forefront, and they value and they are intentional about creating community has been the most life-giving thing for me. And it takes away the whole idea of building a brand like that we talked about earlier too. Like most of
this is our morning conversation.
and most of what we see in when people endeavor to do a project or start a band, write a book, whatever it is for their medium of content that they're trying to share, man, what takes away a lot of the stress of that, and maybe it shows because I'm not great at marketing anyway, but what takes away a lot of the stress of that is valuing the conversations and valuing the space that you're occupying as holy ground because you're with someone who's sacred. And that's something I want to keep in my mind whenever I do get to share music or however that comes, or share poetry. Like, I want to have that heart. I don't always have that heart, but it's something that I find is what's fueling this, is valuing that over, trying to learn how to self-promote, or like, and I know that some people are very good at that, and I think that that's a very valuable, creative way. Like, if your mind thinks that way and you know how to do certain things, like we were talking about an individual earlier who has that kind of entrepreneurial mindset, and I would not discount that, because I think the Lord wants to use that. But for me personally, it's the Lord's really simplified a lot of the way I've looked at things recently, in valuing the simplicity of those moments, and even those questions that we can bring to each other as brothers and sisters in Christ, and even people who are creating music or poetry, but seeing it as, I get to sit across the table from someone, or I get to be in a room, look at people in the eye, and not just at a screen, and see the gift of that. That's, at least for me, coming from the side of the one who's a part of like hopefully partnering with Holy Spirit in that work. And it's, I don't know, my mind, whenever we talk, I feel like it's always like minds are open. Like, my mind is just kind of wide open of just trying to think through it, and process it aloud. But
we have to wrap up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're at that point. But I will say this. One of the things, Michael, that has blessed me so much just in relationship with you, is the fact that what you were just describing of showing up and being fully present with the people in front of you, and not seeing people as something to be marketed to and something to be gained from. It's prevalent in how you live life. And one of the things that I'll even just throw out for those of us who are pursuing to do art for the Lord, one of the things I'm becoming more and more convinced of is the very first thing we have to focus on is becoming the disciples of Jesus that the Lord can use to pour out to others. And I just want you to know that I really see that in you, and I appreciate that, and that's been something that's blessed me countless times. So.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Living Room Disciple podcast. I'm praying that my conversation with Michael was just a blessing to you. I get to have those conversations with him all the time, and they're always a blessing to me. To find out more about Michael's music, where you can go to listen and to support him, we'll put his Instagram link in the show notes below, so make sure to check him out. And also just make sure to go to our website, livingroomdisciple.com, where you can find out more about what we do and how you can support us on Patreon. It would mean the world to us. Thank you so much to Anissa Live for all the amazing production work, to Eric Church for getting this podcast out into the world, for Michael for providing today's music. Those are from his album, so make sure to check that out. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Living Room Disciple podcast, where discipleship finds a home.
Our stories are memories of the past, time's relentless imprint on our tattered souls, the currency of remembrance. the investments made for the greater portion of our days, the brushing of shoulders, the inside jokes between the best of us, our dear ones, the scars we've hidden, the cherished thorn, the wanderings of our mind when the heart is heavy, the innovation found in boredom, yes, the ease of not overthinking this breath, this